The streets of London stood in haunting silence as King Charles III's casket arrived at Westminster Hall. Dressed in full military regalia, Prince William walked behind, his jaw set but eyes glistening. Then, in a moment that stopped millions watching around the world, the heir's composure shattered. Cameras caught him falter, his lips trembling before he looked at the casket and whispered something only later revealed by lip readers. 3 words that shook the monarchy to its core. The procession that silenced London. On the morning of the state procession, London was transformed into a sea of black coats and bowed heads. Tens of thousands lined the streets from Westminster Hall to Buckingham Palace, their silence almost heavier than the winter air. The casket of King Charles III, draped in the royal standard, moved slowly through the capital on a gun carriage. Every footstep of the pallbearers echoed along Whitehall, accompanied only by the distant beat of slow drums, a rhythm that seemed to keep time with the grief of the nation. Prince William, dressed in full military regalia, bearing his Royal Air Force wings, walked directly behind the casket. Cameras zoomed in on his face, composed, but with a redness around his eyes betraying the strain of holding back emotion. For a man who had carried the burden of public life for over 40 years, this was perhaps his most private grief made public. Lip readers later confirmed that at one moment, he looked up at the casket and whispered, "I'm not ready." Within hours, those 3 words were trending globally. The streets of Westminster stood in a haunting stillness. Those gathered said the only sound came from muffled sobs in the crowd and the faint rustle of flags lowered and mourning. Even the towering bells of Big Ben, wrapped in black cloth, tolled in a muted chime as if the city itself bowed in respect. Journalists from around the world later admitted they had never experienced such complete silence in London's heart. That whispered confession, caught on camera and dissected frame by frame, ignited an emotional wildfire online. To the public, it wasn't just a son mourning his father. It was a man confronting the immensity of the crown live in front of millions, and in that moment, the future of the monarchy felt as fragile as the man destined to lead it. The procession moved forward, each step carrying William deeper into the most scrutinized day of his life. But grief is a weight that doesn't follow protocol. As the cortege reached Horse Guards Parade, the emotional toll began to show. The nation watched as the man who would be king faltered under the gaze of the world. What happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present, not as a moment of weakness, but as a rare glimpse of royal humanity. The collapse and Horse Guards Parade. The wide expanse of Horse Guards Parade was silent except for the steady tread of boots and the slow rolling drumbeat. Prince William, keeping pace behind the casket, began to stagger slightly. His right hand gripped the hilt of his ceremonial sword, not in formality, but in quiet desperation for balance. A nearby aide, dressed in black, stepped forward instinctively, but William shook his head, waving them away before turning slightly from the cameras. Witnesses on the edge of the parade ground later described what they saw next. William's shoulders began to shake, his head lowered, and his free hand came up to shield his face. Lip readers would later confirm there were no words, only silent sobs. Princess Catherine, walking several steps behind in a fitted black coat and matching, had froze in place, her expression tight with concern. The scene lasted less than a minute, but in that short span the heir's grief was laid bare. International photographers captured the moment in heartbreaking clarity. The images were front-page news within hours, a future king in tears, breaking decades of royal tradition that demanded stoicism above all else. Broadcasters from the BBC to CNN debated whether this was vulnerability or a breach of duty. But for most viewers, the image spoke for itself, duty and humanity colliding in public view. The emotion in that square was palpable. Some in the crowd wept openly, while others murmured prayers. And as the drums resumed their march, William straightened his back, took a deep breath, and stepped forward again. It was the act of a man carrying more than just his father's coffin. He was carrying the impossible expectations of a kingdom. From the stands at Horse Guards Parade to the far corners of the internet, William's breakdown was already shaping the narrative of the day. But if one moment came to define the procession, it was still to come. It wasn't William's tierce or the drums of London that captured the world's heart. It was a single gesture from Catherine. In a sea of protocol, her decision to break it for the sake of her husband would become the day's most enduring image. Catherine's glance said everything. As the cortege made its way toward the Mall Princes, Catherine kept her eyes fixed on William. She had seen him push through official engagements before, but this was different. His grief was visible in every step. Royal insiders would later reveal she had begged him in the early hours of that morning not to watch the full rout. "It will be too much for you," she reportedly said, but William, stubborn and bound by duty, had refused to stay behind. Catherine's own face told a story. Her lips were pressed together, her eyes glassy, but composed, her body rigid against the cold. The cameras caught the split second when William faltered again, his shoulders bowing slightly under the weight of the moment. Without hesitation, Catherine stepped forward, closing the small gap between them. Breaking decades of royal protocol, she reached out and placed her white-gloved hand gently on his shoulder. The contact was brief, just a few seconds, but in that moment the barriers between crown and couple fell away. It was a silent message. She was not there as the Princess of Wales, but as his wife. That single gesture swept across news outlets and social media feeds worldwide. Commentators likened it to the warmth and compassion once shown by Princess Diana, who famously defied protocol for the sake of human connection. For many, it was proof that love, not ceremony, would define the next chapter of the monarchy. In the midst of a day marked by loss, Catherine's hand on William's shoulder became a symbol of hope. Camilla refuses to break her gaze. While William and Catherine's raw emotion had gripped the crowd, Queen Camilla sat rigid in her glass-fronted state carriage. The casket of King Charles III rolled steadily ahead of her, but she did not turn her head toward the grieving figures behind. Her gloved hands rested on her lap, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. To the cameras it was composure, but to those watching closely it was something colder. A refusal to acknowledge what was happening a few feet away. Lip readers studying the footage later claimed Camilla muttered under her breath, "You'll have to toughen up, he's king next." The words, captured in silence but broadcast with subtitles, struck many as astonishingly blunt for the moment. Whether meant as tough love or criticism, the remark ignited debate across social media and within royal circles. Some defended her as pragmatic, others saw a sharp edge, unbecoming of a grieving widow. When the procession halted briefly outside Horse Guards Parade, William approached the carriage, his eyes lowered, preparing to greet the senior royals. Several aides reported an icy chill in the air as he drew near. Camilla turned her head slightly away, focusing instead on the approach. Watching dignitaries, no words were exchanged between them. The absence of acknowledgement became its own headline by nightfall. The Daily Mirror wasted no time framing the moment cold as the crown, Camilla as callous response to a son's grief. Within hours, #Cold Camilla was trending in the UK. For the first time that day, the national conversation shifted from mourning Charles to questioning Camilla, his judgment and compassion at the heart of the monarchy. The frost between William and Camilla was visible, but the next emotional blow in the procession wouldn't come from conflict. It would come from innocence. Just as the cortege approached the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, the next generation of the monarchy stepped forward in a moment unscripted and unplanned. A 12-year-old boy broke formation and ran toward his father. What happened next melted a crowd hardened by grief and reminded the world of the late Princess Diana's enduring influence. Prince George breaks rank to embrace his father. As the mournful parade turned on to Constitution Hill, Prince George marched alongside his mother, head held high, his black coat neatly tailored for the occasion. He had been stoic all morning, his expression mirroring the discipline drilled into him over the past 12 years, but when he glanced ahead and saw his father's eyes glisten again, something in him broke. Ignoring the centuries-old etiquette drilled into royal children, George suddenly quickened his pace. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the young prince darted past uniformed guards. One hesitated, glancing toward a senior aide for permission before stepping aside. George reached his father in seconds, wrapping both arms around him in a tight embrace. Cameras caught William's shoulders drop, his posture softening as he returned the hug. For a brief moment, neither of them looked at the crowd. It was just father and son holding each other in the heart of London. The crowd responded in kind. Some sobbed openly, others clapped softly and encouragement. Royal commentators immediately drew parallels to Diane, his legacy, recalling her belief that love must always come before duty. It was a scene straight from her spirit. One veteran correspondent told the BBC, "Love in the face of protocol. In a day built on ceremonial precision, this moment stood apart as wholly human." That hug, replayed endlessly on television and online, became one of the most shared images of the day. For many, it eclipsed the grandeur of the procession, offering a reminder that the monarchy's future wasn't just about titles or crowns, it was about the humanity of those who was, or them. By the time the procession ended at Buckingham Palace, the nation had witnessed both deep grief and fleeting hope. Yet behind the palace gates, the atmosphere was tense. Cameras had captured the most personal moments of William's mourning. But what the public didn't see was the silence that followed. Within hours, the Prince of Wales would release a rare personal statement, one that revealed his heartbreak, then retreat from the spotlight entirely, leaving unanswered questions hanging over the monarchy. William's public statement. As the sun dipped behind the palace roofline, Kensington Palace released a statement from Prince William. It was short, barely 2 sentences, but its weight was unmistakable. "I lost not only my father but my guide. My grief is beyond words." The message, posted on official channels at 6:15 p.m., was accompanied by a black and white photograph of William walking behind the coffin, head bowed, the image stark and unadorned, carried the grief the words barely touched. Within minutes, the statement had been shared across the world. Leaders from Canada, Australia, and the United States issued a formal condolences. Social media platforms lit up with tributes, but also concern. Where was William? Why was there no appearance at the private family vigil that evening? The silence from the air only deepened the intrigue surrounding his state of mind. Palace sources later confirmed that William had left London within hours of the procession, travelling to Sandringham with Catherine and their children. There, behind the high hedges of the Norfolk estate, he spent the next 72 hours away from cameras, phones, and official duties. One described him as inconsolable and unwilling to speak to Queen Camilla during the private family gathering that followed the funeral. That absence became its own statement. In an institution where presence is power, William's retreat spoke volumes, not just about his grief. What about the growing fault lines within the royal family? The images of him in tears were now paired with a new headline: "The Prince Who Walked Away." At least for now, Charles' final letter revealed 3 days after the procession, the public learned of a sealed envelope given to Prince William during the funeral. Sources say it was delivered by the Lord Chamberlain himself moments before the cortege left Westminster Hall. Written in King Charles III's own hand, the letter had been locked away for months, marked to be opened upon my death. William, pale and tense, reportedly slipped it into his jacket and kept it with him throughout the entire day. Insiders claimed the letter's contents were both loving and haunting. "You are the future, be strong, but do not let history repeat itself," it read. Royal historians immediately seized on the final line. Many interpreted it as a warning, a veiled reference to the bitter years following Diana's death and to the enduring controversy surrounding Camilla. Some saw it as Charles' final plea for William to protect the crown from the mistakes of the past. Those who saw William at Westminster Abbey during the service said he clutched the folded letter tightly in one hand. Aides offered to hold it for him, but he refused. It remained with him until the coffin was lowered into the royal vaulted St. George's Chapel, Windsor. Not once did it leave his possession. And senior courtier remarked it was as though the king's voice was with him in that paper. The existence of the letter added a layer of intrigue to an already tense royal atmosphere. Was it a blessing, a burden, or both? Whatever the intent, it became part of the day's enduring imagery, a grieving son carrying not just the weight of the crown, but the private words of a father who knew his reign would be short. As the nation mourned and the letter's words spread through headlines, the focus began to shift back to Queen Camilla. For some, she was the dutiful widow holding her head high in a storm. For others, she was a cold presence in a day of raw humanity. In the days after the funeral, her actions would push that perception to the breaking point, turning what might have been a quiet period of mourning into yet another royal flashpoint. Queen Camilla, his power play backfires. Behind closed doors, Queen Camilla was said to be livid. While global coverage replayed William's tears, Catherine's comforting hand, and George's hug, her own ceremonial arrival was relegated to secondary footage. According to palace staff, she confronted BBC producers directly, demanding that more airtime be given to her role as Queen Consort during the transition. The request was met politely but firmly declined editorial control. They reminded her was not hers to commend. The move, however, leaked to the press within 24 hours. Tabloids seized on the story, portraying Camilla as self-interested during the nation's mourning. The hashtag #TriedNotMyQueen began trending once more, echoing sentiments from the 1990s in the aftermath of Diana's death. For many, the optics were damning. While the heir grieved, the Queen Consort was managing her media profile. In response, Camilla, his aides attempted damage control, suggesting she had been misquoted and misunderstood. But the damage was done. Public perception shifted further against her, with opinion polls showing a 7-point drop in approval within a single week. Political commentators noted that in a constitutional monarchy, reputation is currency, and Camilla had just suffered a significant withdrawal. The final blow came when aide to Prince William reportedly blocked her from issuing a solo statement of condolence to the nation, calling it inappropriate during mourning. This rare intervention made headlines of its own, signaling that William's camp was no longer willing to let Camilla, his voice, overshadow his father's memory or his own role as heir. If Camilla's standing was weakening, one royal's influence was only growing stronger. Princess Anne, and long known for her no-nonsense approach to family and duty, watched the funeral coverage closely, and what she saw from William's collapse to Camilla's carriage, composure, left her deeply unsettled in a family where open criticism is rare and was about to break with tradition. She would make her loyalties clear, and in doing so signal a subtle but unmistakable shift in royal power. Princess Anne takes a stand. Princess in the late king's only sister had long been a quiet force within the family, but in the week after the funeral she was overheard in the palace corridors telling Charles' former private secretary, "Back off, William, he's grieving." The comment, according to staff members present, was a direct response to his perceived coldness and the pressure building around William to resume public duties. Privately, and warned senior courtiers that her brother would never want this circus to overwhelm his son. She reportedly insisted that William be allowed the time and space to process his loss before being pushed into the public spotlight. Those who know and well say she has little patience for palace politics when they interfere with family loyalty. The moment that confirmed her stance came one evening at Buckingham Palace. Cameras captured and walking arm in arm with William as they returned from a private memorial dinner. The image was widely shared with captions noting the warmth in solidarity between the two. For many royal watchers, it was more than a gesture. It was a passing of the torch from Charles's generation to William's. And intervention may have been subtle, but in a family where body language speaks volumes, it was a declaration of allegiance. And for William, navigating both public grief and private strain, it was a reminder that not all of the old guard were against him. And public show of support solidified the perception that the Windsors were entering a new chapter, one shaped less by Camilla, his influence, and more by William and Catherine's quiet leadership. But the most powerful shift was yet to come. In the days following the funeral, a piece of the past emerged that tied the moment back to 1997, when another royal coffin had passed through London. It was a reminder that some legacies never fade and some promises are never forgotten. Diana's legacy roars back. As the images of William's tearful procession spread, comparisons to Princess Diana's funeral flooded the internet. Side-by-side photos showed a 15-year-old William walking behind his mother's coffin in 1997, and the 42-year-old prince doing the same for his father in 2025. The symmetry was heartbreaking, and for many it underscored the weight William had carried his entire life. Commentators noted the cruel irony. Diana had wanted to protect her sons from such public displays, yet history had repeated itself. Then came a revelation from the royal archives. A letter handwritten by Diana and sealed since her death had been found during a recent logging addressed to her sons. It read, "William must never carry this weight alone again." The message, released with the family's permission, struck a chord worldwide. It seemed almost prophetic, resonating deeply with the images of Catherine's hand on William's shoulder and George's embrace. Social media lit up with tribute to Diana, with hashtags like #. The parallels were impossible to ignore, even for those who typically avoided royal narratives. By the end of the month, public sentiment had shifted noticeably. William's vulnerability, Catherine's compassion, and the echoes of Diana's humanity were being seen as the path forward for the monarchy. Whether or